So I made it to the Environmental Health Center of Dallas. I want to say, even though I did in the original video, looking at all the different labels of chronic illness that I'm discussing, I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Rea. He passed away a number of years ago now, but he was a real pioneer in the medical field, and unfortunately, very misunderstood, or maybe intentionally misunderstood by numerous organizations, including medical organizations, because he practiced medicine outside the box. He did what worked. And if he wasn't the doctor he was, again, I wouldn't be here. He became ill as a thoracic surgeon from working in surgery, from all the anesthetic that he was around. And after becoming chemically sensitive, he decided to focus his practice on clinical ecology or environmental medicine. He ended up writing, and he had a co-author, I believe three, if not four, textbooks. And I mean textbooks. I don't have any of his books. University textbooks on chemical sensitivities. He believed that chemicals were the real culprit in much of the chronic health issues that we're having today. And I have to agree. Now, he didn't say that there weren't other factors like viruses, genetics, diet, psychological, emotional issues, heavy metals. But he believed chemicals were kind of the crux of it, hence the name chemical sensitivity. His textbooks included many studies, double-blind studies, peer-reviewed studies. This wasn't stuff that he was just kind of pulling out of thin air. They weren't just kind of observations he was having in his clinic. I don't know why we aren't further in looking at these chronic conditions. I really don't. Except for what I've already said. And that is that, unfortunately, medicine doesn't recognize multi-system problems. And that's what chronic conditions are, multi-system problems. And unfortunately, once you start talking about chemicals, the environment, and how we're being affected by all of these problems, then you start stepping on big toes, and nobody wants to look at that. I get to the Environmental Health Center of Dallas, and I think I saw Dr. Ross at the beginning, but maybe it was Dr. Rea. I'm not sure. That was back in '92. So that was a few years ago. And he just looked at me and said something like, "Dear God, what have they done to you?" I didn't look very good. And yet I think I had a smile on my face because that's just how I was. And he immediately had me admitted to Tri-City Hospital, where he had a unit. And he told me to clean myself up, that he was going to start administering TPN because I was under 140 pounds at the time. I had no idea what TPN was. All your nutrients, your proteins, your amino acids, because it's all broken down, your carbohydrates, and your lipids. And that can be administered in large veins. He put a port here in my chest. And he did it without an anesthetic. And why did he do it without an anesthetic? Because by that point, I was chemically sensitive, and he didn't know if I would react to, a local anesthetic. So he basically came in the room the next day. My mother was there. And he said, "This is going to hurt like a Texas mosquito." Apparently, he's never been to Canada. But I suffered through it, or got through it, I should say. And though it was not pleasant, It wasn't the worst thing I had been through. But what I still remember is going to the mirror afterwards and looking at myself. So at that point, I just had shorts on or a bottom. I don't remember. I had nothing on my top. Again, I was under 140 pounds, and I had a tube stuck in my chest with 3 wires coming out. And I remember crying for the first time, thinking, what would my sister think of me now? And my sister was 9 years younger. And I didn't see her much of this time during my illness. But there I was at Tri-City Hospital, hooked up to TPN. So shortly after that, they started the TPN. And thankfully, I didn't react to it badly. I mean, I probably reacted a little bit to it. But because it bypasses your digestive system, where a lot of people have their issues, I was fine. Now, I will say this. Everything that Dr. Rea administered was in glass. So not in plastic bags. The room that I was in was completely tiled. It had air filters in it. All the water came in glass by a company called Mountain Valley Company, which is still around from, what is that town, city called in not Arizona, but Arkansas, Little Rock, I think, or Hot Springs, Arkansas, Mountain Valley Spring Water. So thumbs up to them. And that started my journey. I was allowed 1 food per meal. The food was either baked or boiled. No salt, I don't believe. Maybe there was, I can't remember. So he put me on a rotation diet, meaning I was only allowed 1 food per meal and only, I don't know if he put me on a rotation diet. A rotation diet is where you eat 1 food from a food group every 4 days. So if you eat oats today, and it happens to be Monday, then you can't eat anything from that family, not rice, not barley, whatever else is in that family for until the 4th day. Because it takes that long for your system to process the food. So not just your digestive system, but your whole system. And some people benefited from a longer rotation diet. And at the time, honestly, I didn't even really need to eat because I was receiving everything from TPN. But thank goodness. I mean, I felt so great there at the hospital. This is the first time in years that I felt safe, that I felt supported. I had my own room. I had my own TV. I mean, I know it sounds crazy. People think about hospitals like they're places for sick people, but I felt like I was at a spa. I mean, I was like, this is amazing. Like I've arrived. um, and I still remember some of the people there during the time. I don't think they all felt the way I did. And rightly so. Some of them were scared. I mean, they were obviously all sick. Not all of them were necessarily feeling better the way I was. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Rea at that time suggested colon surgery for me. He knew I was doing these colonics on a daily basis. And so he did what is called a barium enema. For some reason, they don't even really do that test anymore. I'm not sure why. Again, gastroenterologists and the medical field today, as excellent as they are at acute care, just don't do so well with chronic health. Fail, quite honestly. Because I never had a barium enema done by all the gastroenterologists I had seen to this point. I never had a barium enema done at Montreal Neurological Institute. So Dr. Rea does a barium enema. Now, I don't know what your understanding of anatomy is, but this is simple anatomy. Your colon, which is your large intestine, where the food gets passed from your stomach to your small intestine to your colon. Your stomach and your small intestine is where most of the digestion and absorption take place. Your colon is where you have most of the bacteria, and some of the electrolytes still get processed and absorbed, and water gets absorbed, and then eventually the food or the leftovers get excreted. Your colon is about 4 to 6 feet long typically, and it looks like kind of like an upside down U, or at least that's how it looks in ideal cases. Some colons are longer, some are sometimes twisted and looped, some are sometimes redundant. I don't know why they use that word, but in my case, my ascending and descending colon were extremely redundant. So on the barium enema, instead of an upside down U, my colon was a little like this, and then it went way up here somewhere, so it was too long, and then it kind of looped at the bottom. But the ascending and descending parts, instead of being maybe like this when they were filled with the barium solution, were like this. So again, that word redundant. So simple, right? This isn't rocket science. This is like kind of like a muffler. Right? You have a muffler, doesn't work, you cut the part out that doesn't work, you replace it, you put the two sections together, you get on your way. So basically that's what Dr. Rea suggested. We need to do colon surgery on you. We need to cut out these sections. I think it'll be helpful. I wish I had asked more questions. I wish I had spoke to him more about it. I wish I spoke to other people about it. I was scared, and I said no, and I went home. And that almost cost me my life. I wasn't able to get back for another year because the government of New Brunswick wasn't willing to pay for the expenses of my visit. And nobody in New Brunswick was willing to touch me with a 10-foot pole or do the surgery. Again, that's where we are when it comes to chronic health conditions. Nobody else could recognize what Dr. Rea saw and recognized. I remember even talking to a GI doctor about what Dr. Rea suggested, and he just kind of looked at me like, okay, that's nice. And what do you want me to do about it kind of look. I really don't understand why. Well, I do. I do in some way. I do and I don't. Why that should be such a surprising suggestion. I did make it back. Dr. Rea did do the surgery. And my allergies went from 85%, or at that point, they were worse, down to 20%. So my allergies went down significantly. And within a few days after the surgery, I was eating, and that just continued to improve. From the hospital, I went to a place that Dr. Rea had at the time, which was in the country. It was a little kind of trailer camp of sorts, where all of the homes and trailers, small homes, kind of like tiny homes almost, were kind of like what he was trying to do was create an environment like he had at the hospital, where there weren't materials like in our day-to-day lives, carpets, and plastics, and other things that off-gas and could cause people problems. So all of these homes and trailers were lined in porcelain. There was glass, there was wood, there was metal. There was nothing that was toxic in the way that we think about it. The problem there was, though, that it was in the country. There's lots of pollen. There were ponds or small water sources around, which provided lake algae, and being in a completely metal home or trailer. These were, at least the interior of them was metal that was lined with porcelain, can cause electromagnetic issues for some people that are sensitive. It's kind of like being in a sardine can. But I continued to flourish there. I continued to get better. And I continued the TPN even outside the hospital for a couple months until finally we decided to stop the TPN because I was eating and I was continuing to get better. I know at the time I started to see a chiropractor. I was having some back pains and issues. And so I started to see a chiropractor on a regular basis. I made some friends out there in Seagoville at the camp. We called it the last resort. And there's plenty of stories. There's plenty of stories from that little place. One of the young fellows, I have no idea where he is now and how he's doing. One of the patients there, he was probably many things. I don't know what he did, but he was quite an artist, and he made shirts. He made a logo of Seagoville with these little raggedy trailers and this clothesline with these little rags hanging on it and a seagull flying above. But it was, for me, because I was getting better, it really didn't matter what the place looked like. It was interesting. For someone that used to golf, for someone that used to downhill ski, it was the first time I really connected with nature in the way that I did. I used to go on these long walks, and I just saw things very differently for the first time. But again, my experiences were not the same as everybody's there. Some people didn't have support of their families, didn't have financial resources. Some people weren't necessarily getting better, if they were getting better, it would be a long process. I was very fortunate because it's not an easy. Anybody who's experienced chronic illness knows it's not an easy process. There isn't one shoe fits all. And even though Dr. Rea, as I mentioned in the first video on ME and myalgic encephalomyelitis, even though he had a protocol, and I believe that protocol was and is still a good protocol, nobody knows how each person is going to respond to that. Dr. Rea's protocol was pretty simple. Now that I've touched on that subject, clean food, so organic, rotate your diet, clean water, clean air. Repeat. Now, he also believed in things like chiropractic and massage therapy. In fact, he had an acupuncturist that worked at the center at one time. He had a massage therapist working there. I don't know if he had a chiropractor working there. Now, he also oftentimes suggested people do his skin testing and shots, which were very different from the regular allergists, which is why he got into some of the fighting, for lack of a better word, with different medical organizations. I don't know why they didn't recognize it. They felt threatened by it, but it isn't the regular allergy type testing. It's something called neutralization provocation, where you treat on the neutralizing dose, not on a dose that provokes symptoms, which can work. Again, when you go to a regular allergist, you're pushing your immune system to get better. And by pushing it, you're causing a reaction, a mild reaction by the substance that you're injecting. But for someone who's extremely sensitive, that would cause a severe reaction. So you can't do it. So you have to treat on the neutralizing dose. So it's not that it's a completely different, and yet different enough that it caused a lot of controversy, I guess, among people and groups of people. And Dr. Rea finally also suggested many people exercise as you're able, never pushed exercise on anyone, especially people with chronic fatigue syndrome or myalgic encephalomyelitis. Some people respond really poorly to any exercise. But he also suggested sauna therapy, dry heat sauna therapy. And later, as time went on, infrared sauna as well. So, years, 8+ years of being chronically ill, that being my life, every day being, how am I going to get through today? What do I need to do to get through today? What can I learn today to getting well and being, what am I going to do now kind of feeling. I think that's where maybe I'll start next time. And then I'll start talking again about complementary health and eventually about healing. But what I want to say before I end this video is I don't think some people realize how much energy it takes to be sick, really sick. People used to sometimes ask me, well, what do you do all day? And I was like, what do you mean, what do we do all day? Or what do I do all day? It's like, well, when I used to do colonics or high enemas, that was a procedure that sometimes took at least an hour to boil water, to cool it down, to do the whole procedure of the enema, to prepare food for the day, to eat, to wash clothes, to study, to research. You're tired, so you only have so much energy to do all of these things. If you can do all these things at all, again, some people with some of these chronic health issues can't even get out of bed. So I remember thinking, how do other people do all the things that they do? And yet, obviously, I used to go to school, I used to work, and somehow I did all of that. But again, being chronically ill for so long, all of that just became foreign to me because this had been my life for so many years. And so then when I was finally well and back home, it was just a shock to be back in the system, so to speak. And it wasn't like a gentle kind of, oh, welcome back. And, let's take one small step at a time. It was just like a deer in headlights. What am I going to do now? So I still sometimes ask myself that question. And even with these videos, I don't know where this will go, if anybody will see this, if this will be helpful. But here I am making these videos, and hopefully they'll be helpful to someone. But I'm going to leave it at this point, and see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.